my greatest pranams and gratitude to Sridhar ji and the Balaji Temple for giving us this opportunity to study Bhagavad Gita. Om. 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 Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavatam Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Kratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Vridavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatvam Anusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavatveshini. Namostute Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Fullaravindayata Patra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajwalito Jnanamaya Pratipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraika Panaye Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Geetam Brudaduhe Namaha. Sarvadharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja Aham Tva Sarva Papebhyaha Mokshayishyami Ma Shuchaha. Hari Om and welcome to everyone. So today we're going to start with something that I always wanted to do but never got to do it, and that is we're going to start in a very simple way as a reflection time. What do I mean by reflection time? So here basically I'm talking about a very, very simple way of engaging everyone. So let us see how well we do in some of these very, very simple questions. You don't have to run away, but it's just a simple one. Okay, we'll get started. What you can do is you can put your answers in the chat, or if you want to say it out, you can unmute and say it as well. What is the name of the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita? Can anybody say it?
Arjuna Vishada Yoga.
Arjuna Vishada Yoga. Very good, very good. Can you elaborate on what you mean by Arjuna Vishada Yoga?
It's just defining problems.
Defining problems. A little more depth there. What Vishada means? What does Vishada mean?
Grief.
Grief. Awesome. Very good. Excellent. And the name of the second chapter?
Sankhya Yoga.
Sankhya Yoga. Yeah, Sankhya Yoga. And what does Sankhya mean?
Very well defined.
Very well defined. Very good. Very good. Okay. Now that we went through the easy ones, let's come to the third one. What were the conflicts of Arjuna? Now here we may have a few answers here. So whoever wants to go, please say that. I mean, you can take your time. I know there were many conflicts for Arjuna, but we can also raise it to one conflict or something in a very simple way what the conflicts were.
He was feeling overwhelmed that he will be killing his relatives, his pitamaha, his guru, his acharya, that he is going to be doing everything.
Very good. So he was going to be doing, okay, good. Any other answers? Any other thoughts?
His delusion and also like his attachment to his people, like mine.
Delusion and attachment. Okay. Very good, Anita. Attachment to his people. Uh-huh. Okay, so essentially you can divide the conflicts of Arjuna, what he was going through. And Suvarna, you're right. It is about him. That is one thing I want to make sure the chat. Arjuna gives up his determination to fight. That is okay. That was sort of an end result. But the conflicts that were going into his mind were basically, you can say it in three different levels, you know. One is at the body level. He thought that all these people, as you rightly said, Anita, you know, all these people are mine, right? So the two things I had used at that time was aham and mama. Aham ete and mama ete sham, you know, so it is me and my people. So that is one at the physical level. And at the mental level too, basically the conflicts were different ways he was trying to rationalize. On one hand, he was emotionally attached. You could see the delusion, the derangement, you know, how he gives up his bow and everything. He gets really perturbed. That's an emotional way in which is affected. But intellectually, he was trying to rationalize many things about the people, the kingdom, the joy and sorrow that he would get. So all this can potentially be looked into three different ways of physical, mental, and intellectual conflicts, all arising from him as a person, you know, from there. Okay, so there were this can be looked into two major problems for Arjuna. There were two Sanskrit words that I used. And if you can give me the Sanskrit word, that'll be great. But I think the English word, one of them, Anita already said it. But what is the other one? So one was delusion, moha, moha or delusion. And the other one is, of course, which was mentioned earlier, which is the Vishada part of it, or shoka. Shoka and moha. Shoka and moha was the biggest two problems for Arjuna, and also for us, those are the two major deep-rooted cause for the problems. And finally, how did Lord Krishna try to stir Arjuna up in the beginning of the second chapter? Any thoughts on this? How did Lord Krishna try to stir Arjuna? He tried to sort of wake him up in the beginning. Okay, you can think about it, but yeah. Let me see, there's a chat. That nothing is permanent. Okay, that is a little later. But in the beginning, in the shlokas 2 and 3, if you remember, he says about how, you know, he pushes them saying that you are un-Aryan-like, and then you are, you know, the Klaibyam ma smagama partha naitatva yupapadyate. That was one. And the other one before that was kutastva kashmalamidam vishame samupastitam anarya jushtam aswargyam akirti karmarjuna. Saying that, oh, Arjuna, you know, whatever you're doing, you're not behaving like an Aryan, you're not really acting as a man, you know, all those things. So Lord Krishna tries to, you know, sort of stir the courage in Arjuna up in this way. It was in shlokas 2 and 3. Okay, so I can see that this was probably a little difficult. Maybe next time I'll try to make it even more simpler. But if you have any feedback, let me know. I would be happy to see how because from now on, I think I'm going to start with a few questions like this just to get us going here. Okay. Okay. So we started to look at last week about how Lord Krishna accepted Arjuna as his own disciple. And it all happened only when Arjuna said, "Oh Krishna, please teach me." And Krishna was really happy that he finally had a student in whom good sense prevailed. You see, he was confused, right? But along with that confusion, at least he had a little bit of an inkling that maybe something was not right. So Krishna, was really happy. And he says, the shloka goes, Prahasan iva Bharata. Krishna was smiling within himself because he wanted to enlighten him. And therefore, it was one of the most beautiful beginnings of this chapter. And how does he start this teaching itself? If you recall, at the end of the first chapter, okay, Arjuna was shoka samvigna manasaha. Shoka, grief, manasaha, with his mind full of vigna manasaha, was full of sorrow. And when he saw that he was going to cause destruction and death of all the noble people and they will die, all that was affecting him, right? And also there was so much of grief and death. So because of the fact that Arjuna was so full of this sorrow and so full of this grief, Krishna starts his teaching in the 11th shloka with this aspect of grief. And you see how Lord Krishna starts to go deeper and deeper into this aspect of it, because he really wants to get to the final cause and eliminate it for Arjuna once for all. Because even though Arjuna asked, "I'm totally confused about my dharma and tell me what is good for me," but what Krishna heard was that if I don't tell him what his true dharma was, then how can I ever bring him that clarity of thought? And this, he was able to do it only by telling him what his true identity was. Because, friends, I mean, for all of us, when we don't recognize truly what my identity is, even in our vyavaharik plane, in our transactional plane, when people ask us, can you do this job for me? And if I'm not extremely clear on what my strengths are, and if I just accept to do something without understanding who I am, then I'm in for trouble, right? This is in a vyavaharik plane. So imagine in the case of when Lord Krishna himself is trying to tell us what our identity is. So he goes deep down to explain truly what our identity is. And that is why in this next shloka of 11th, he actually starts from explaining from the highest standpoint what our true identity is. And that is why we find that even Bhagwan Shankaracharya, throughout the first chapter, he does not say anything much. And he starts his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita only from this stanza. And what a philosophical stand he explains. For example, when you think clearly of Arjuna's dejection, we find that even though we understand what the immediate cause is, which is the challenge of the war, right? But just like a doctor going into understanding truly what is the cause of any disease, we find that Lord Krishna does that too by getting to that very cause. And this is where Bhagwan Shankaracharya also gives us a tremendous amount of insight into all these shlokas. Because you see, Bhagwan Shankaracharya, when he came on the scene to write a commentary on Bhagavad Gita, there were already a lot of commentaries. But Bhagavan Shankaracharya wanted to really explain the real reason for Arjuna's not wanting to fight. And because of that, he wrote the commentary, and he wrote in his introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, where he explains about the Shoka and Moha and how the reason for explaining what the identity or the true identity from where Arjuna was trying to fight his own problems. So this is exactly why we read Bhagavan Shankaracharya's commentary, and I will be bringing a number of those into our discussion as we go through a number of the shlokas. So today is actually, we are going to be touching on some very key shlokas. So we might be going a little slower than usual, but all for a good reason, because in order to come to that particular shloka, which I'm hoping we will be able to touch in today's, there is some deep concepts that will need to be explained. So in this shloka of Ashocya Nanvashocastvam, Prajna Vadamscha Bhashase, Gatasun Agatasumscha Na Anushonchanti Panditaha. He says, O Arjuna, you're grieving for those that should not be grieved. Ashocyanan Anvashochahatvam. On the other hand, Prajna Vadamscha Bhashase, you're speaking words of very wise people. But Panditaha Gata Agata Asumscha Na Anushochanti. Wise people do not grieve over anything, over living or over dead people. In other words, Bhagavan is asking Arjuna that really speaking, there is no reason to grieve. And he's now going to put forth all the arguments. Why should one not grieve? You have grieved, or you're grieving because you think that they are your people, that they are somebody who need to be grieved for. That's okay. But don't speak like as if you're speaking like a wise man. That is a contradiction here. So you see how we see Arjuna really wanting to grieve for people in three different ways. For example, he thinks that the people like Bhishma and Drona are people with flesh and blood and everything who will continue to live on, right? So as a jiva, then Krishna is trying to tell him that they are not going to be there. They have their own place to go to, and if they get killed in your hands, it is not because of you. So, and we will be looking at the shloka later on. So for gross body, shloka is not proper. And then in this shloka, we will see the concept of Atma being brought out. Atma, which is eternal. Atma, which is the essence of every being in this transactional reality. In that also, Atma is eternal. So you don't have to grieve for it. So that is also needed, not needed. For Jiva, we don't need it. And as a gross body, that is also going to be perishing. So you don't have to grieve. So why are you grieving? So that is the sum and essence of the shloka. But we're going to see a little more here. The key thing in the shloka is this Panditaha na anushochanti. That is, in Sanskrit, Pandaha Atma Vishaya Buddhihi Yesham Tehi Panditaha. So Panda here refers to that Buddhi, which regards Atma, that I am that infinite reality. Now you may be wondering, how did this word Atma ever come here, right? Now in Sanskrit, because you have these definitions which bring out the essence. So you have Pandaha, which is referring to that buddhi which regards Atma as the infinite reality, that I am the infinite reality, I am that Bhuma, that person is a Pandita. So you can imagine, so Pandita, that person, not only is he a wise man, wise person, wise woman, but that person recognizes that that person is not the gross body or the soul or the Sukshma Sharira, the Karna Sharira, but that person recognizes that I myself as that infinite reality. Only that person can understand the essence of life. And so such a person will not grieve because he alone has that pandityam. So if Atma Buddhi is not there, other knowledge will never make us a Pandita. So that is the reason why in this shloka, the whole phrase of Panditaha na anushochanti is such an important phrase to be mentioned here. What is nice about this shloka, what is great about the shloka that we also learn is in this shloka, for the first time, we have the concept of Atma being introduced. And you will see this concept of Atma being discussed all the way up to the 30th shloka. And everything is explained from that aspect of Atma or a Paramartha standpoint. So if you look at it from that standpoint, what the shloka is trying to say is that living and dead, which is when he says, Panditaha na anushochanti gatasun agatasunshcha, gatasun indicating those people who are dead and gone. So gatasun actually refers to that statement where that person whose pranas have left. And agatasun is that person in whom the pranas are still there. That means the living people. So this living and dead is only an upalakshana, or it is just an indicator. So we do grieve over people who die, are near and dear ones, but then we also grieve over so many things. Like, for example, if I lost my key or something happens to my car, all that, right? But at the level of Atma, which is eternal, none of these things really matter. None of them are worth grieving for. And that is who a Panditaha is. And therefore, Sri Krishna makes Arjuna understand that when he refers to him as Prajna Vadamscha Bhashase, that Arjuna may be talking like a wise person, but in Sri Krishna's eyes, a Panditaha is a person who is way, way beyond. And the Pandita is a person who recognizes that he is the eternal reality. Everything is nothing but the eternal reality. So in that sense, what are we trying to achieve here? Who are we trying to grieve for? So it is also now looking at it from that eternal reality. It is this eternal Atma in man, which is asserting its false identifications with his body. So here I have this very famous, what we call as the BMI chart, which was popularized by our own Gurudev Sri Swami Chinmayananda. And you see how this Atma, the eternal reality, identifying with the body, mind, and intellect, basically takes on the role of a perceiver or a feeler or a thinker and enjoys this world of objects, emotions, and thoughts. And as it gets entangled in this world of objects, this one, it undergoes a false identification with them, and it experiences this imperfections of the emotional world and assumes by this false identity with the intellect, it comes to suffer its hopes and desires and ambitions and ideologies. So this Atma thus getting reflected in this intellect here is really this ego PFT, which you see here. And it is to this ego actually which belongs all our sad destinies of life. And this is the one that undergoes really the mental afflictions and everything. So this is who Arjuna is really represented here by this perceiver, feeler, thinker, which through its equipments of body, mind, and intellect is going through all this. And because of all this, Lord Krishna decides that Arjuna needs to have that highest knowledge in order to eradicate completely this identification with his body, mind, intellect, and thereby understand truly what his true nature of Atma is. And that is why this shloka starts at that very high level to give Arjuna this level of self-knowledge. And that is why Panditaha na anushochanti is given here, which is such a person who recognizes that he or she is that absolute consciousness will never ever suffer the delusions of being this limited ego of PFT, which is limited because of his identification with his body, mind, and intellect. So this being the first shloka of Atma, I wanted to give this brief introduction to this wonderful chant here. And we will be using this quite regularly throughout our lecture because it really allows us to understand where we stand as the body, mind, intellect, getting these experiences in this world and suffering through a lot of them. But if we recognize that we are this Atma, then we are above any kind of experiences which can be gone here. So just to give you that perspective. So having said that, how does that shloka help us to translate that knowledge what is given to us here itself? So what does that really mean to us? So just like Lord Krishna is trying to remove that very source of that Arjuna's delusion, which is encast in that particular, if you will, the body, mind, intellect chart, by pointing out that Panditaha, that wise people who do not grieve, so too we should understand that we should not really grieve in the sense when grieve for a long time. That is, of course, when somebody dies close to us, we are definitely very much affected by it. But if we understand that each one of us are in a journey through life, each one of us have taken up this equipment of body, mind, and intellect in order to satisfy our own desires. And once that is done, we actually go to seek another body, to seek another set of, to actually, because of all the karmas that is there in ourselves, in order to satisfy that, this particular body does not give me enough to satisfy everything. So I take this journey. So it is just like how when we rent a car, say, for example, to go from Detroit to Chicago, and then we find that the car is not good enough for me to go for another set. Perhaps I have to drive all the way up to California, and the car I have is not good enough, then I have to change the car, right? So too, in this regard, Lord Krishna is trying to show about how we can, become in different bodies to satisfy different desires. So too, when somebody dies or this one, we of course are affected by it. But if we recognize that each and everyone are in a journey, then we don't have to grieve for too long. Of course, to a certain extent, we have all our traditions in our culture, which gives us a certain amount of time to grieve. But beyond that, this is where the word anushochanti comes. The word anushochanti basically means continuous grieving. And panditaha na anushochanti, which means that panditas are that person who recognize the limitedness of the body, but yet recognize that our own self is unlimited, it is eternal, and therefore they don't grieve. So na anushochanti. So that having said, let's move on to the next shloka. So in the next shloka, we saw that natve vaham jatu nasam natvam neme janadipaha na chaiva na bhavishyamaha sarve vayamataf param. So the question probably would come is that, does that mean that this Atma was there always, or was it not there? And that is why Sri Krishna is explaining this question. Na tu eva aham jatu na asam. And this asam comes from this as dhatu, which is lang lakar, which is uttama purusha, ekvachan. Na tu eva jatu. There was never a time. Na aham na asam. I was not there. There was never a time that I was not there, referring to again that aspect of Atma. So there's no reason for grief because they're always nitya. Na eva, never jatu, never. Jatu, there never ever was. There was never a time, na eva asam, when I was not there. So that means what? It means that I was always there. So there is, the way the sentence construction is there is a double negative. Na aham asam iti na. So there was no time when I was not. So then obviously Arjuna might be saying, but Bhagwan, you were there because you're Bhagwan, right? But there was a time when I was not there, right? But Bhagwan says, no, na tvam asihi. There was never a time when you were also not there, Arjuna. Then Arjuna probably asked, so what about all those other kings? Na ime janadipaha na asan kintu asan eva. Meaning that they also were not there. So there was no time when I was not there. These people were not there. You were not there. I was also ever there. You were also ever there. All these people were also ever there. And again, Bhagwan is talking from that Atma standpoint. From the standpoint of body, it may appear to be that I was not there previously, and I will not be there afterwards. But as a jiva or a subtle body, I might be there previously, but I'm in this journey throughout. So that is what the shloka we see here. So another way to look at that also is to see how, we have, I don't have my pot here, but a pot, for example, if you look at the pot, what is the eternal thing in the pot is the clay, right? So clay was always there. The clay is made to make different pots. But once the pot is broken, it goes back to the clay, and the clay is then made into a different pot, right? So to the different ornaments, we use gold to make a bangle. And once I'm tired of using the bangle, I melt it down, but the same gold is used to make make a chain. So what is constant in all this is the gold, but not the bangle or not the necklace, right? So too in the pots, you have one pot. The different pots, they are temporary, they come and go, but what is more permanent is the clay. So, and then this is a continuation of that shloka where it says, how can we say that Atma is nityam? Okay, so Bhagwan is now explaining through experience. Previously, that was done through I would say through Shruti. Now he's explaining through Yukti or logic. So, dhiraha, who is the dhiraha? Dehina asmin yatha dehe, kaumaram yauvanam jara, tatha dehantara praptihi, dhiras tatrana muhyati. So here we have dhiraha. Who is he? A dhiraha is a person who is a viveki. He is a sadhana chatushtaya sampanna person. That is, he's a person with the highest qualifications or highest amount of sharpness of intelligence. And that intelligence which has come um, um, because of having a high level of sadhana chatushtaya, which is shama, dama, uparati, titiksha, all that, right? So he recognizes that the one who is going through all this God's body is a subtle body, but here the prakaranam is of Atma, not the Sukshma Sharira. So we can explain this like just as Atma goes through the young baby and then Kaumaram and then Yavanam and then Jara, so too the Atma expresses through different bodies. Dehantara praptihi and Dhiraha tatra na muhyati. So Dhiraha, this wise person, again, just like this wise person is somewhat just like you have the Panditaha, here another word that is used is Dhiraha. So Dehina Shabda here is used to show that it is different from Deha, which is the body. And this is only recognized when there is Deha, not that it is Sambandhi, but its recognition is just not possible in the absence of Deha. That is, you cannot really see Atma except when the Atma takes up a different body, because Atma by itself doesn't have any properties. And we will be seeing this in many of the shlokas, which is coming up later. But again, this shloka is trying to say that dhira, just like the Pandita, he does not grieve because he recognizes that this Atma goes through different bodies. Just like even within a body, that Atma goes through childhood, youth, and the old age. And it is the same Atma which also goes through the three states, the Jagrat, Swapna, Sushupti, or which is the waking, deep sleep, and dream states. So in all this, what is continuously there? It is only that Atma. So Bhagavan is saying, so this is that. So therefore, you have this wise man, he does not even grieve for that reason. But then Arjuna was thinking, okay, now you've explained about the journey through different bodies. You've also explained about why I should not grieve. But what about this body? In this body, I go through a lot of pain. I go through sorrow. I go through hunger. I go through thirst. I go through joy and sorrow and everything. So what about that? How can you explain that, O Krishna? So we have the shloka, which is Matra Sparshastu Kaunteya Shitoshna Sukha Dukkadaha Agama Payino Nityaha Tam Stitikshasva Bharata. Krishna is saying to Arjuna, hey Arjuna, that is true. When we live in this ever-changing body, which is going through the boyhood, which is going through youth, and which is going through old age, it does go through it does experience the pain and pleasure. But let me explain. So Lord Krishna tells him that in this body, we have all these sense organs, the 5 sense organs. And these sense organs, they come in contact with the sense objects, all the eyes, ears, mouth, the tongue, skin, nose. They undergo a lot of experiences through all this, and they experience heat, cold, joy, and sorrow. But then even though they go through it, you just have to tan titikshasva bharata. You just have to endure it. So Arjuna must have asked, why? Why should I endure it? So Krishna says, well, they come and go. Don't you even see that? And that is true. We have seen with the temper, with the seasons. The seasons, they are cold now, but they're already starting to warm up. And pretty soon it's going to be nice and beautifully warm. And then it's going to get hot. And then it's going to get cold. And so that is the nature of the sense experiences. So they come and go. They are agama payi. Agama coming and apayi. Apayi meaning they are end. So that being the case, you just have to endure it. So when it comes, because so the very fact that they come and go, they come and go, they come and go, indicates that they are not permanent. So when something is not permanent, why would you want to be affected by something like that? You just have to adjust to it. So that quality which makes us sort of immune to such fluctuations is actually called as titiksha or endurance. Titiksha really makes us learn to endure them bravely. So the Gita guide is that we should learn to be balanced in all these variations of sense experiences. And this is possible only if we learn to detach from the sensory stimuli. Easier said than done, right? Especially for us living in this country, sometimes, and in this times of weather, when it gets cold, we are wanting to somehow increase the heat in our house. But what the shloka is trying to tell us that, yes, as long as it's there, you can enjoy it, but not to get upset if something happens. What if we lose, the thermostat stops working, or there's a problem with our heating system in the house? So, tam stitikshasva bharata, endure them bravely. And we will come to this shloka, as the importance of the shloka is felt much, much later when we come to the 15th or the 16th shloka. So the whole idea is trying to see how I can be independent of all this and to recognize that it is anityaha. Anityaha indicating that it is impermanent and it is not eternal, and also or anityaha means non-eternal in this case. You can just keep it at that for now. So this brings us to the 15th shloka, indicating that this endurance which we gain by not getting ourselves affected by all these changes in matra sparshas tu kaunteya, shita ushna, shitoshna sukha dukkadaha, which is joy and pain, heat and cold, being not affected by any one of them. That kind of a calm endurance, both in pleasure and pain, is actually a very, very necessary condition for us for this self-knowledge, in order to understand the knowledge of Atma, in order to understand the knowledge of my true identity. And that which is a technique for self-realization. And this is really what is there in all our Upanishads, which is talked about, which here you see Lord Krishna building it up so beautifully for Arjuna from one step to another, all the way first by indicating what is Atma, and then or giving one of the lakshanas of Atma, saying that Atma is eternal and therefore you don't have to grieve. And from there on, talking about the eternality of Atma, and then coming on to what we saw in the previous shloka about, but from the body level, not to get affected by it. So having the titiksha, which is actually one of the big qualities of Shat Sampatti also, once we have that, that makes us prepared for the self-knowledge itself. And so let us chant the shloka here. Yam hina vyathayantyete, yam hina vyathayantyete, purusham purusharshabha, purusham purusharshabha, samadukha sukham dhiram, somritatvaya kalpate, samadukha sukham dhiram, somritatvaya kalpate, yam hina vyathayantyete, purusham purusharshabha, samadukha sukham dhiram, somritatvaya kalpate. So Bhagavan addresses Arjuna again very nicely here by calling him Purusharshabha, saying that you are a noble person, Rishabha. And by addressing him like this, Bhagavan Shri Krishna is actually asking him, so then why are you allowing all these small, small things to disturb you? You see, from where Lord Krishna is taken Arjuna up, from that level, now if you look at all the things that Arjuna was getting affected, whether it is the losing the war, or understanding about his relatives, all that. Of course, his teachers were very, very important. I'm not saying they're not, but looking at the level that Krishna is taking Arjuna up, literally he is pushing him all the way up, and he's asking him to look at the whole scene from the high level down. Now he's trying to say that, at that level, isn't this all the things that you're looking at, small, small things? Hey, Purusharshabha, you're allowing all these to upset you. So by first, making Arjuna feel great, saying that, oh, Purusharshabha, meaning you're great among men. So you should have much more endurance for all this, right, Arjuna? So he says, Lord Krishna says, yam na vyathayant yete. Yete yam purusham, that person whom ete, that is these, what was said in the previous shloka, that is referring to matra, sparshastu, etc. Shitosha sukha dukkadaha, agama payino nityaha, tam stitikshasva bharata. Oh, Arjuna, for you, that person who is, this contact of sense objects with the senses, which give heat and cold, which come and go, all these experiences, the typical physical, mental plane, all these joys and sorrows, which do not cause pain and which come and go, vyatayantyete, they do not cause any pain. So for that person, and also again referring to as, no anushochanti, that they're also not sorrowful. So for such a pain, for such he is very balanced in samadukha sukham. So here again he uses the word dhiram. You see dhiraha, dhiram. So indicating that the third time he's now introducing a term for that person who is unaffected. So samadukha sukham dhiram, somritatvaya kalpate. Such a person is fit for that moksha, or free from death. So indicating that only when I prepare myself from being affected by any kind of joys or any kind of pain, heat, cold, pain, sorrow, all that, such a person is ready for that knowledge of self-realization or moksha, or that person is free from quote unquote death, which was referred to in shloka number 11, where he says, gata asun, gata sumscha, which is, so to qualify for such a person to be fit for moksha, one has to have all these qualities. Such a person has that ability for amritam. Here, amritam indicating immortality. So, amritatvaya kalpate. Such a person is fit for realizing that immortality of self, or to recognize the Atma Tattva in him. Such a person is one who is able to maintain that equipoise or equanimity in this mind. So equanimity is here, which for us in typical things, we get so affected by anything, by any news that we get, or even if we get something really good. In both these cases, we are so elated, we jump for joy. But here, the person dhiraha that is referred to here is used with the indication that such a person is equanimous, and is able to endure anything that goes with it. So that it's a beautiful word again, amritatva kalpate. And such a person called dhira is a person who doesn't have any restlessness, and he's equanimous. And such a person it is possible for that person to reach the higher self and to recognize the immortality of self. So again, Lord Krishna is trying to explain to Arjuna about the reason for if he wants to really be able to come out of his sorrow and grief, it is not enough that Lord Krishna just gives him a simple dose and tell him, it's okay, Arjuna, this is what the life is all about, just like a normal therapist would probably give him an idea. But Lord Krishna, being the ultimate psychologist, ultimate psychiatrist, ultimate therapist, whatever you might say, he wants to give him the ultimate knowledge and explain to him with the immortality of the self, to make him understand the immortality of the self. And once Arjuna gets it, then he will be able to see that his problems at that level does not even exist. So, which is why he's trying to get to that level and give him this knowledge here. So I see that the time is 9:23. And today I did want to, but maybe I'll just do one more slide here. And then I did want to take at least one or two questions. So let us go to that. But okay. So how do I relate this shloka to my own life, to our own life? So again, the way we could probably look at this is to see that in anything and everything we do, we need to have that titiksha, we need to have that equanimity, that forbearance to deal with things. And we do that. We do that in simple ways. For example, a student studying, knows that he has to work hard in order to get his grades, or he has to work very hard to do his SAT well in order to get to a university. We see an Olympic champion, for example, it's working extremely hard. He, of course, has to go through some pain as he trains himself to be an Olympian. We see all that. So, but here, Lord Krishna is trying to talk about not the things that we do externally to us. It is this internal titiksha. All those examples that I gave, now try and see how we can push it to ourselves. What are all the things that we go through, whether it is joy or sorrow, whether it is my son getting into the best university, my son getting the best residency, for example, or my son or daughter, for that matter, going through, being able to win this wonderful scholarship, or think about many different joyous occasions, and think about a lot of the sorrowful occasions too. What was my reaction to all that? How soon did I get back my composure? How long did I take to get back to that composure? So something to reflect upon. And when I reflect upon that, I will be able to recognize what the shloka is trying to tell me, which is samadukha sukham dhiram somritatvaya kalpate. So as we find ourselves getting into that composure where we are able to maintain that balance and pushing ourselves to bigger and bigger things that may come to us, and still trying to see how quickly I get to that composure, is what will allow us to understand this knowledge, to understand the self-knowledge. So in that sense, these shlokas are trying to also point out the various qualifications that we need to build within ourselves in order to recognize this self-realization concept. So with that, I thought I would go to the 16th shloka, but probably next week we will do that. Having built this aspect of Atma, I think it'll be easy now for us to understand this most deep and sort of a difficult concept to understand, which is coming up in the 16th shloka. Okay, so that we will do it, but let me take up these questions. And first of all, I want to thank you all for your mananam on this topic and to recognize the questions. And I really got a lot of very nice questions. I've taken only about few in here. One of them, which Meenu had brought up, is based on last week's shloka, which is Krishna tells Arjuna not to worry about Bhishma Pitamaha and Drona, and that they'll go to heaven after dying in the battlefield. So it does look like they chose to take adharma. So how do they qualify to really go to heaven? That is the question. And again, what does that mean to people like us? What is the motivation for us to choose dharma when we know that the end result is really the same for all of them? Well, the answer here is, let's take the case of Drona and Bhishma Pitamaha. In their case, they were great Mahans, no doubt. They lived a life of being true to their profession. They did everything to the best possible goodness. With all goodness, Drona Acharya was the greatest teacher. Bhishma Pitamaha was the greatest leader to lead the Kauravas. The only fallacy in them they were on the side of the Kaurava army. And they were on the side of Kaurava army for reasons which we know. Dronacharya was supported by the Kauravas. He helped his son Ashwatthama, for example, was supported by Dhritarashtra. And Bhishma Pitamaha was, from the beginning, he had taken a vow to be with the Kaurava army. So that being the only failing on their part of them, the rest of their life, they led a very good life. So for that reason, they went to heaven. They had an opportunity to go to heaven. But then in the overall scheme of things, does that mean that, things that they were realized people or self-realized people? No, they were not. There were still a few things for which they will definitely have to bear responsibility for some of the actions that will happen. So at the end of the day, it is important for us to be very dharmic in our actions, because it is only our own dharmic actions that will propel us forward. And we will not be able to make a conclusion by just one or two incidents that we see which happens in this lifetime. So as an example, I think some of you must have seen the posting that went around, which explains in some sense, like, for example, King Dhritarashtra, for example, he had 100 sons, and he unfortunately was a witness to seeing all his sons dying. So he goes to Lord Krishna and he says, why is it that I had to go through this, seeing my sons die? So then Krishna explains to him about how 50 births before, King Dhritarashtra actually killed about 100 birds. And so he had to face the consequences of it much, much later, when the situation became such that he was able to get 100 sons. So even though he enjoyed having 100 sons, he had to face the consequences for it. So it is important to have a dharmic way so that it helps us to move forward. The second question, why Dronacharya didn't choose to do the right thing, dharma versus doing the right thing. He was a great sage. I think that sort of explains what I already said about the first one, which is he was always he definitely did the right thing all the way through, but again choosing to stay with Kauravas was why he did, because of other reasons. But nevertheless, he still was a great sage, and as we all know, Arjuna was his favorite disciple too. And the Battle of Mahabharata is materialistic, if I understand correctly. They didn't get basically the kingdom in simple lands, correct? Is that not correct? I did have a discussion with Das, who gave these questions. That is true. The Battle of Mahabharata can be looked at it more from our Vyavaharik Satta, or the transaction plane. In that sense, it is materialistic, or you can call it as an individualistic, where every individual's play, you can see this happening, and it was all done directed towards getting something out of their actions, which is where I think he's explained this as being materialistic. And so in that sense, yes, so Mahabharata cannot be looked at it from the paramarthic plane, for example, from a very spiritualistic view, but you can see that Bhagavad Gita is the Upanishad which has been right in the middle of Mahabharata to give the knowledge for self-realization. None of us have any right to take life of other person. That is true. None of us, by doing the action, or by intently, cannot really take the life of another person. And again, in our practical day-to-day life too, we see that doctors, when by doing a surgery or something, if by mistake, if somebody died, that doesn't mean that they took the life of that person, but it just, it was part of, it just happened because of their profession. So, but by itself, none of us really have any right to take our life of the other person. I know this needs a little more elaboration, which we'll continue this next time, because I don't want to take too much of your time. We will take this last question again for next week for more discussion on this one. So with that, I will stop here. And if you have any further questions on this topics, or even in what we discussed, please do send me an email or a phone or a WhatsApp. I would love to hear from you. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kasyat dukkha bhag bhavet. Om shanti shanti shanti. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.
Thank you.